Welcome to the Flute NI. Join me, Aisling Agnew, as we explore the unique world of the flute in Northern Ireland. World-renowned players, teachers and makers from a wide variety of musical backgrounds share their experiences and expertise. This episode features the multi-talented flute player, composer and educator, Sarah Murphy. Thank you very much for agreeing to chat with me, Sarah.
Thank you, Aisling, for inviting me. It's lovely to be asked.
So I think you hold a very unique position in that there can't be too many English flute players living in the city of Derry. Could you tell me a little bit about how you ended up there?
Oh, well, of course, it's always love that brings you over. I met my husband at music college at Guildhall School of Music and Drama, and we lived together and worked together in London for a few years. And then in 1998, he said, I'd quite like to move back home. It was actually a time when it was possible. So we upped and moved. It was a sort of for a year's trial, and I've been here ever since.
And can you tell me a wee bit about before that, your own development as a player? I mean, you said about studying at the Guildhall, but where had you come to that from?
Well, the very beginning of my love of the flute was, I suppose, that I was given a flute for my 10th, for Christmas before my 10th birthday. And it was a really magical moment for me. And I remember the joy of it as if it was yesterday. I can see the case, the red velvet, Boozy & Hawkes student flute, and I was so thrilled to get that flute. A tune-a-day tutor and a promise of a few lessons. And it was just the best Christmas present I think I've ever had. Neither of my parents played music, but they listened a lot. And my dad had sort of taken to educating himself in classical music when I was very young. So I was exposed to listening to an awful lot. And he liked this little chamber organ piece. I don't even know. It was a Baroque chamber music record that was played over and over again. And for some reason, that connected me to the sound of the flute. So I taught myself to play the recorder from a little book as a primary school. And then at church in the folk choir where I sang, a girl who played the flute, I used to pester her every week, please teach me notes, show me how to blow. And after 2 years, I think my parents finally realised that possibly they ought to buy me a flute. So that's how it started. But my father was, he didn't know anything really about music in terms of instrumental learning. So he announced to the young local flute teacher who they booked lessons with that he would like me to attend the Royal College of Music within about 2 years. And I just imagine, you can't imagine. I mean, if someone said that to me, a parent said that to me now, I think the eyebrows would shoot through the roof. But actually, what happened was that the young flute teacher's mother, who was an excellent pianist, said, well, if you have that ambition, then she must learn the piano as well, and she must learn music theory. So within about 6 weeks, I was learning flute, piano, music theory, and all sorts. And my dad's wish did come true, and I auditioned, and I did end up going to the Royal College of Music Junior Department about 2 years later. So, it's a sort of an extraordinary dream come true for him. And it was just fun for me because I just loved playing. I loved music, always loved music. And I know I was very, very lucky then to have that opportunity. So I just travelled up every Saturday to London on the train from the age of 12 and was totally over my head, totally overwhelmed, hadn't a clue what was going on half the time, had to relearn my technique. But in the end, sort of worked up the ranks, played principal flute in the senior orchestra in the last 2 years and made good friends and colleagues that moved on to music college with me. And in my hometown of Croydon, I also played every single Sunday that it was on with the Arthur Davidson Training Orchestra. And so all my life, my whole weekend was always music. and lots and lots of practice. I think that was my whole childhood, I think. And then, of course, I managed to move on to Guildhall School of Music and Drama. I had several teachers while I was there. Edward Beckett, of course, the Irish flute player, and Samuel Beckett's nephew. So that was a sort of my first connection really with Ireland. He studied with Jean-Pierre Rampal and Marcel Noyes in Paris. So he brought that real intensity of technique to my lessons, to my tuition. And then I became ill and I had to leave for a while. And when I came back, I actually then moved to Philippa Davis, and she taught me a huge amount about resonance and tone color, and was incredibly inspiring. And I had loads and loads of masterclasses: Peter Lloyd, Jeffrey Gilbert, Will Williams, William Bennett, Stephen Preston. So it's getting huge amounts of really amazing, input at that time, really. So yeah, it was great. Very challenging as well. Lots of personal challenges from the age of 15 with my mum being seriously ill, and then my dad being seriously ill, and then bereavement, and then having to be a guardian for 2 siblings and all sorts, starting a young family. But music was my solace through all of that. Music's always accompanied me, and it's been the place where I can always have that non-verbal just connection to emotion and self, and it's always been wonderful, and a accompaniment through life.
Yeah, that's wonderful, because a lot of people would describe their music college years as being very intense and very demanding. And if you add on to that incredible difficulty in your personal life, that could be almost too much for somebody. It's amazing that it managed to stay as special to you throughout that.
I think it's if you love music and you have a natural connection. The flute's such an intimate instrument, isn't it? It's a very physical instrument, and I think that it was always my place of solace and comfort. But it doesn't mean to say that it wasn't intense. Actually, it was an intense experience at music college, and I did get seriously ill at one point, having to take entire year out, and I had a lot of, you can imagine anyway. I mean, looking back, I was trying to juggle a lot of things. It was incredibly difficult, but I always saw the playing, at least, as the comfort.
So tell me about musical activities that you were involved in then after leaving the Guildhall. What kind of things did you do?
Well, lots of things actually. Festive Flutes Quartet is a lifelong sort of social and professional flute quartet. I started it with a friend of mine, Elizabeth Walker, in the first year of the Guildhall, and the reason was because there's 4 students in the Guildhall. We had both been to Junior Royal College together and played in the orchestra together, and we didn't want to sort of have any cliques in our first years. We just said the others want to form a flute quartet, and so we did. We didn't know that all these years later we'd still be playing together, and it was a great fun during our time together at Guildhall, because we played on Opportunity Knocks, we played in lots and lots of background music venues. We played at the Savoy Hotel every week for an entire year. Once a week, got our dinner, and we performed at many of the societies in and around the city of London. We weren't supposed to be performing at all at that time, but I was saving money to buy a good flute, and everyone else thought, why are they not letting us play? So we just sort of organised things and played. And then we, of course, auditioned for Live Music Now. And after Guildhall, we played all around the UK with Live Music Now, and lots and lots of music societies booked us, and that continued. Our careers took us in different directions, further study for some in Paris, further study for some in Holland. So the rotation of people who played with the group changed. So the friendship widened. It became almost a pool of amazingly good flute players who just enjoy each other's company and enjoy playing music together. So that's been amazing. And we've recorded albums, we've raised money for charity, we've done all sorts of things. We had a 30th anniversary reunion 2 or 3 years ago in London with all the players that had played with us, and special guests and people who'd seen us performing in Canada, and people who'd seen us performing all over the UK. Yeah, so it was great. And the last concert we did together was in North Devon in 2019 as part of the North Devon Symphonia Festival. But unfortunately, I'm not sure when we'll play again. I kind of missed them. Then apart from that, I had a really strong interest in world music and in workshops and communication skills at Guildhall, and that led me straight away to being asked to play in a group. And the folk orchestra was a group that I then sort of played with for 9 years. And it was an amazing opportunity and an amazing group to be part of. Basically, we were researching music from different countries. We traveled to those countries. We collaborated with different musicians, a composer who arranged music for us to perform. It was an incredible experience. And we toured all around Europe. We made a CD called Trans-Danubian Swineherds Music, a very catchy title. And that was back in 1992, and it was produced by Joe Boyd under Hannibal Records. And there's still a few copies lurking around. It's completely crazy in a way, CD. I'm playing many ethnic flutes on that. I'm singing, I'm playing percussion, doing all sorts of things. But that time, that 9-year period really introduced me to a whole different color world, I would say, more than anything else. Color world, scale world, in Turkey they use monotones, there's scales that they can decipher 9 tones within one tone, 9 little different versions of a tone rather than our just one semitone. So the tone colors that we learned were incredible. The instruments I ended up playing, the kabal and the voyanka from Bulgaria and the ney from Turkey and the Andean pipes from Peru and all sorts of things. And it just opened my world. The rhythms, like the rhythms from Colombia, the rhythms from all over the place, we just immersed ourselves in that. There were 9 people involved. It was a crazy, crazy time, but it remains one of the standout influences on my future musical life. It sort of imploded in on itself after a lot of success, because I think there's 9 very strong, very talented personalities in that group, and every one of them has gone on to be probably a lot more successful than I have, really. So it was a wonderful experience. And also at that time, I was doing freelance orchestral playing, which was great. And I was also invited on a regular basis to perform with Juan Martin, flamenco guitar player, and with both for his flamenco dance troupe and a concert project called Music Alhambra, which sort of explored the Moorish influences and Arabic music and all sorts of things as well. So it was all sort of in the round, but it was a really wonderful but incredibly challenging time, because I was also raising 2 siblings, but also I had rather quickly with my husband 2 children. And so sort of we toured, we both played in orchestra together, and we both played with Juan Martin, and we had a little help from an au pair. But other than that, we arranged that for all our concerts, our children had to come with us. That was part of that. If they booked us, they booked the package with our children. So it was a crazy time, and after 9 years of that, I was probably fairly burnt out, ready to have a pause. So that's sort of all my life before moving to Derry in 1998.
When you moved over here, would you have been aware of how the flute would be perceived in Northern Ireland, or how popular it would be as an instrument? Would you have had any kind of idea of the likes of flute bands or traditional players, or even the extent to which James Galway had influenced this army of flute players?
Certainly James Galway I heard of, because James Galway was on the TV in the end of the 70s, and my parents had bought albums of his and I listened to them a lot. So he was a huge influence on me. And I do have a funny story where, while I was at Guildhall in my second year, I was helping out with the new intake auditionees for the following year. and I was listening to the sound of a flute player playing incredible scales and incredible music. And I turned to my friends and we're in trouble. We're really in big trouble. They're coming next year. So we poked our head round the door, and of course it was James Galway practicing. It was a moment, and much later on in life in Northern Ireland, not so long ago, one of the great flute challenges, Glenn Houston organised, and Festive Flutes were guests at that occasion. And so James Galway and Lady Jeannie on the stage with us, having a great time, really. So yeah, I had heard of James Galway. I don't think anyone on the planet hadn't at that point. Other than that, pretty much nothing, because although I performed here with the folk orchestra and obviously we'd visited family here, other than that, I didn't really know anything. I had imagined that I would come here and it wouldn't be that different from England, and I was in for a huge shock, really. I think I obviously knew about the traditional flute, I was excited about, because again, Matt Malloy is a huge influence. Listening to his music and just being blown away by him. For me, that was what the Irish flute was, Matt Malloy. And coming here, yeah, it was very different, but it wasn't very immediate. I didn't really know about flute bands, and their world is very secret, really. If you're not part of that world, you don't necessarily get exposed to that world in any way. So the only thing I knew about them would have been on the marches. It was a lot further down the line before I found out really more about them. Not really hugely until 2013, when I did a huge, big local project here as part of the City of Culture, which is great, which involved the Britannia Band, the Hamilton Band, and the William King Band all coming together. And again, Festive Flutes were the sort of soloists. Mel Orris, an amazing arranger, runs Wonderful Winds, and she had arranged Sean Davies' Very Symphony with special permission by him for a wonderful performance. I learned a huge amount about what is the social element and a huge number of people's playing and the passion of the flute, really, which is absolutely exciting and rewarding. And then I didn't really get exposed either when I moved to Derry to the traditional side, because again, that seemed to be very much if you didn't know any, everything's word of mouth, or you had to know somebody. So again, it took me quite a number of years before I really was exposed into the local scene. And really, I think it was playing informally at parties and getting to know people, and then people getting to know me and then inviting me to play with them. And then suddenly that world opened up a little bit more to me. So a really lovely time playing with traditional musicians and singer-songwriters in the local area, like Paul Heron and Paul Harrigan and Jolene McLaughlin and Porrig O'Brien. And then obviously over time, that's, I've met many more people like Marcus O'Muir, who he ended up being part of the City of Culture project in 2013 with us. So it was a gradual unraveling, I would say, more than anything else. When I moved almost to have a break from my extremely busy life. I had another child. I settled here. I taught a lot because I love teaching. And I just sort of settled myself. It took a few years really to kind of look back over the quite traumatic events in some ways of the previous 15 years of my life, and then gradually kind of got into a different flow here. I think then I managed to meet up with Ruth McGinley, the extraordinary and wonderful pianist. Locally, we did a few concerts together, and that was a joy. And then a local guitar player, Sean Wood, we did a few guitar and flute recitals together before. Unfortunately, he got focal dystonia, which meant he couldn't play so much anymore. So sort of, ebbing and flowing. And also since 2004, with the Ulster Orchestra, I would be a dep for them. And the last concert I played with them was back in March, just the week before lockdown, the first lockdown. And, that was a wonderful experience. But who knew at that time that was actually my last concert? That's kind of terrifying. Yeah, so lots of opportunities that have sort of gradually emerged, but a lot of my connections are still with colleagues that I actually met at the music college, and I still will work with them, and I still travel, and I'm always looking for new opportunities. I have a great interest in all sorts of different styles and types of flute. And earlier in 2020, I'd just been awarded a Baroque flute by the Arts Council of Northern Ireland. And I was sort of exploring the Baroque flute, and I had a concert July 2020 in Torellio in Italy, and that was just going to be part of more of the work that I was doing with different colleagues. And of course that all stopped. So, I'm hoping that I'm just always curious about different types of flutes and different sounds of flutes, and that leads me in different directions, I think. And the Baroque flute is the direction that I'm really wanting to travel in.
You're obviously so comfortable playing different flutes, and you said about the folk orchestra. I mean, obviously from the outset you were happy to just pick them up and try. I mean, has that kind of always been your way? And how many flutes then do you own currently?
Well, I've never counted, but there's a lot of them. There's a lot of bits of bamboo and bits of and clay pipes and all sorts of things. So I'd say probably about 60, but that's just a random number, actually. I've never counted them before. And I'm still curious, and I haven't played some of them for a very long time. Some have been put away, and then other new flutes have emerged. So very recently, I think back in 2015, the local taiko community group, Ibuki Taiko, Fiona Umitsu, she runs that, and she said, well, have you ever tried a Japanese flute? And I said, no. Well, would you mind having a go and just playing with us for this couple of pieces in our Obon festival? And she loaned me one of her Shinobu bamboo flute, and I figured it out and listened to the melodies and worked it out what I was to play, and off I played. But then obviously she asked me to play that more, and gradually I got more and more interested in that. And at the same time, other work that I was doing, lots of educational work, had led me to helping lots and lots of people be creative together, and had led me to really being interested in composing myself. I really wanted to personally write something, but I never really found time. So through Fiona and her Obon festival, they commissioned me to write a piece for their next festival. Shinobu flute, marimba, full set of taiko drums and percussion, voice, Irish harp. So an eclectic mix. And I just thought, yes, I've been talking about doing this for a long time. This is my opportunity. It was a moment of extreme contentment for me to be able to sit down, research, and write this piece. And it's been played ever since in many guises, and it's been, even this year, shared all around the world. So it's actually something that was really, really special to me, that piece called Taiko Love. And as part of that, I wanted a better flute, because the flute that she had given me was it was a so-so instrument. But of course, being a professional, I wanted the better quality instrument. So I did a lot of research that year, made an awful lot of contacts online around Japanese music and Japanese players and Japanese flute makers. And an amazing person called Ranjo-san was mentioned a number of times to me, and I ended up going to London for a Japan exhibition, and flute players were performing there, and they brought over an instrument from the maker, but which were unfortunately not in the key that I'd written the piece in. I then had to contact the maker direct, and he posted a flute to me. I bought a flute from him, and he posted it to me from Japan, and it's wonderful, and I love it. And that actually led me to a real lifelong, subsequent joy of Japanese music and investigation. I made contact with Haru Watanabe, who's an amazing taiko flute player and percussion player in New York, but of Japanese origin. And he actually studied for many years in Japan and played with the amazing world famous Kodo taiko group. He was arranging a sort of gathering of musicians to take them to a 2-week exploration of the roots of taiko and the roots of Japanese culture. And I was really very fortunate, again, the wonderful Arts Council of Northern Ireland. I got a grant to be able to take part in that. meet musicians from all over the world in Japan back in 2017. And I learned so much. I met Rando-san, the flute maker, because as part of that course, he was the most famous and best loved maker of shinobi flute and had made many for Karu. So he took us to his home. It was a beautiful hut in the middle of, rural part of Japan. And he gathered bamboo. I mean, outside his house was probably thousands of pieces of bamboo. And then when he felt it was the right time, he would take the bamboo and then create these instruments. And he constantly experimenting. He didn't just make shinobi flutes, he made all sorts of different flutes out of bamboo and other materials. And it was his workshop, and I just had the best time. I made a flute myself. He showed me how to make a flute. It was just amazing. It was a real highlight. But the whole of the trip was a highlight, and it was completely fascinating, totally addicted to Japan and its culture ever since, because just especially the traditional elements of the music of Japan. And subsequently then was commissioned to write another piece, which I have took all my experiences of Japan and wrote this piece called The Swan and the Crane, sort of juxtaposing Ireland and Kerry and the foil with Japan. And it was again commissioned by Foil Lobon, and that was performed with dancers. I was very proud of that, but it was very difficult for them to play because I'd taken a lot of the new rhythms and the new ideas back from Japan, and it was a challenging but exciting piece to play. And I have a notion to rework that for classical chamber music group. And I've been then commissioned. I was asked to play for a lovely local community group, really open to playing with absolutely everybody. And another lovely community group, Japanese people who have created the Northwest Japanese Cultural Association, and they've created a Yakuno Kamishibai paper theatre company and asked me to play flute for them on the shinobi, and commissioned me to write, I think it's 5 now, pieces of music for their paper theatre plays, which are in the sort of process of recording. And that's been a great joy as well, because living in Derry, I like playing with everybody. I like whatever opportunities open to me. Everybody's a musician. Some people are deemed professionals because they are really trying to earn their full living out of it. And some are musicians who play just as much and all the time and have a huge love for it. And I'm equally inspired by just good musicians. That's it. It doesn't matter who they are, what they play. Just people who love music and really interesting and good creative projects as well. That really inspires me.
I'm interested to ask you about when you're teaching, do you feel like any of these things find their way into your teaching practices?
Well, I would say that, I love music, so I just teach from I teach from love of music. I just think that everybody is musical. If someone has come to you with a flute and wants to learn, then I'm going to look at where they're at and, whatever age they are, and encourage them to find their own interest, encourage them to listen, because I felt that listening really inspired and has helped me throughout my life from an early age. I encourage them to learn by picking out pieces themselves as well. So, in one afternoon I could be teaching Star Wars 1 minute, Super Mario the next, and Telemann Fantasia or a Piazzolla study, whatever is of real interest, because I think that people are engaged by something that sparks an interest, so I'm not so focused on exams, although I do take people to exams if they want to. It's more for me, it's music for life. Most people aren't going to want to try and do the crazy thing of being a professional musician, let alone a professional flute player. So I want to give people the joy, my joy, but also encourage their joy of music through the flute. I have a small number of local students, and I teach for the Ulster University, and I also have some Zoom only, as it turns out, and students that have popped up this year, so that's a new thing for me. And I'm open to teaching everybody. I absolutely love teaching amateurs. I love teaching adults. I love teaching children, pretty much everybody. One of my colleagues who I teach with for the last 4 years with a course in Italy called Flutes in Tuscany. We had to cancel last year's Flutes in Tuscany. People from all over the world come, amazing young flautists, along with amateur adults. And it's an amazing course that myself and Elizabeth Walker, who started it, would be there every year. But because of that cancellation, Benslow Music contacted us and said, would you run an online course? Which she did to start with on Telemann. And then she phoned me up and said, they want another one. I'd love you to be on board with this. So we've taught 3. We taught one on the Mozart concertos, one on Bach, J.S. Bach and C.P. Bach solo sonatas, and one on solo French repertoire. So they're a week-long course each time. And participants have an individual lesson every day, and then they have masterclass for an hour in the morning and the evening, warm-ups and historical context, listening and discussion. And it's been a huge success, completely unexpected, huge success. It's been an absolute joy because actually, we've had people from Canada, we've had people from New Zealand, Australia, Sweden, as well as England and Ireland coming on the course. If you love the flute, you love it, and you want to meet like-minded people, and you want to share all your knowledge. And I've learned a huge amount from the participants. I've been really humbled, actually, and I'm really delighted to have been a part of that. Also, I work hard to make sure that I'm meeting everyone where they're at. But I don't only teach. I only really teach 1 day a week, apart from the courses that I get invited to teach on, because I do a lot of other work. I have my composing, but a big part of my work is community music engagement. And that is a major part of my life, and probably since 2011 when I set up with some colleagues Waterfall Music. And that has been a big part of my life. And that really developed out of a love of music education and engaging people in music making, sort of a branch out of the teaching of flute, just into just the love of general music making, and have the ways to do that. And after years of experimenting myself and leading for every group that I worked with, I was always inventing and leading education projects. And then I thought, well, actually the time has come really to set this up, because it was another opportunity for me. I think you have to sometimes, when there's not much around, you have to create your own opportunity. So that's what we did, and mainly in Donegal and in Derry, and then gradually across Ireland, all ages, all ability levels, all instruments, creating music together, composing music together, and performing it together. None of it written down, because that's the nature of it. A lot of people are put off by not being able to read. So learning how to improvise, for me, that was learning how to facilitate this to the standard and the level of the vision that I had. And I went back to the Guildhall School of Music over a period of a year. I trained up in new techniques, and then I developed my own. And it's been going ever since. We've collaborated with lots of people. I mean, in the City of Culture year, of course, it was with the LSO and Guildhall School of Music and Drama, bringing people over here and exchanging ideas. Do a lot of work with poetry, sometimes with dance, sometimes with other visual images. So lots of people involved. Then after that, in Donegal, we set up a sound waves program, which was for teenagers, all ability levels and all instruments, and they would compose music, very, very complicated music, because they didn't know how to write it down, so they didn't know it was complicated. We had lots of multiple time signatures going on, and that meant nothing to them. And why should it? It was only me who was thinking, well, we're really pushing ourselves here. I also then was subsequently asked, well, how are you doing this? And would you train? So I've also trained other music services and teachers to do similar types of work. I've also worked for Musical Futures as their coordinator to help creative music making in schools across Northern Ireland, and run a conference between 2012 and 2015. So I've done, there's lots of things that are, that it's sort of a propelling journey. These challenges this year have been unbelievable, absolutely head frying and quite disheartening at times, because nothing beats a live performance. not for the performer and not for the listener. It is not the same recording and sharing online. It just isn't. You have a memory, an emotional memory to the occasion and an attachment. And those moments in my life of going to concerts that have moved me to tears, or I've played in concerts that just have you, it's that you can't describe it. And that is what's missing. I don't think that's easy to replicate. It's wonderful that we have all these other opportunities, festivals online. It's wonderful that these things have emerged. Thank goodness to keep the art message out. And a lifeline for all of us professionals. But it isn't the same. I just long for the day when I can play with people again and get people playing together again.
I know. Well, thank you so much, Sarah, for sharing all of your stories and all of your knowledge about things. It's been so fascinating to listen to you. And the thing that really strikes me so clearly is your love for the flute and your love for music that you've carried through everything and that you bring to everything that you're doing. And I think the level of creativity that you're bringing to the arts here is just really wonderful. So I really appreciate you taking the time to tell me all about it.
Thank you so much, Aisling. It feels like a spiral of events that have sort of emerged, of this journey. Because I think a musical journey, it's your interests that lead you. And if you're open to collaborations, which I am, or you're open to new ideas, you're open to starting again or to finding out something new. You are a lifelong learner, you're a lifelong, explorer, you're curious about music. If that is part of you as a musician, which is part of me, then you get led into all sorts of avenues that you didn't even imagine. I couldn't have imagined any of this as a child, none of it. And who knows what will come next? Who knows what will happen next?
Join me next time when I'll be speaking to two very talented young brothers, Ross and Jake Houston.